The Committee of the Whole is back from recess. Senator Augustine, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to move that we accept Bill 24-37 COR as amended and further amended by the Committee on General Government Operations and Appropriation. And that bill has been passed out to all my colleagues, and I just asking for their support so we can accept that, and that would be the discussion.
Thank you, Senator Augustine. The bill, as amended and further amended by the Committee on General Government Operations and Appropriations, has been passed out and it is uploaded to the drive. So there's been a motion to accept this version. Are there any objections? Speaker Terlahi, you are recognized.
It's just technical. I just wanted to clarify. I think it's supposed to be, since we're already in the Committee of the Whole, amended by the committee and further,
Amended by the Committee of the Whole.
yeah. I have no objection to this version being
Okay.
accepted.
Are there any other?
Objection? No.
Senator Fisher, you're recognized.
Thank you, ma'am. I rise for the purpose of moving for a recess until...
Objection.
There's been
Objection. The
an
people of Guam are waiting for us to address this issue. We're here.
Clearly, the legislature is not ready. We've been sitting here for 4 hours at your request doing absolutely nothing. There is a non-debatable motion for a recess.
That's correct. There's been a motion to recess. There have been objections. All those in favor of a recess, please signify by raising your hand. Motion fails. So we are still on the motion to accept the version as amended and further amended by the Committee of the Whole.
If I could just ask the sponsor of the motion to just inform us what's the difference between this version and the version that the governor sent down to us in the special session.
Does the author yield to the question?
Yes, yes, Madam Chair. The version that was sent to us is that it includes, let me just be able to identify the page so that everyone will be able to focus on it. It's on page 8. You'll find that the difference between the governor's proposal, she asked for 16. We added on the judiciary to appropriate 1,049,363. We also identified when the difference between the governors was 16 million. The reason why in the beginning it goes up to 20 million is because we have to add judiciary because they're not a line agency. We also added University of Guam. We added Guam Community College, the Mayor's Council, and the Public Defender's Office. That's the difference.
Yeah,
And that's why it moved from 16 to 20 million,
okay,
or
no,
19 million.
No, those were, sorry, I'm talking about the governor's version on the call to session. So the governor sent us the original bill totaling 16 million. Then she sent us another version during her call to session. So we have been on this Committee of the Whole with the governor's version attached to the call for session, which totaled about over 23, remember?
That's correct. The reason why, when you look at that 23, it addressed that, number one, that 23 was a 12-month budget request, when it should have been reflected that it's really, we should be addressing only a 6-month because it goes in effect in April. So that's an error on that part, that we're addressing the 23 million when it should have been 16 million, which is cut the 23, which actually equates to 31 million. We should have went down.
Does that satisfy your question, Speaker?
Could I, if you don't mind, before I vote on that motion, I just want to clarify, because there's people watching us, they can't understand why we've been waiting for hours to get this session started, and I want to make it very clear. Because the bill's been changed, it's been substituted on this floor, we're going to accept a new version, but the version that we're accepting does not change any of the proposals that the governor made in her in her call to session under the Organic Act. The appropriations are the same for
Point of information, Chair.
Section 4, DOA, Section 5, Judiciary, Section 6, UOG, Section 7, GCC, Section 8, Mayor's Council. Those are the same amounts in the governor's bill?
That's correct, but I want to be able to
One
provide.
moment, Senator
Okay.
Augustine. Please state your point of information, Senator Dueñas.
Point of information, Madam Chair. If you go to page 8, you will find, and I'm making this point of information because this is what I discovered and asked to make this change, because there was a worksheet that was issued out on the pay plan from BBMR. And it turns out that the substitute bill adopted $4 million in revenues for GMH when GMH was already included in the 16. So if you go to section 6 of the bill, GMH is lined out here. And that's what brings the appropriations down by $4 million. So the new revenue now is adjusted at a little over $20 million as opposed to $24 million, 9, whatever, which is an adjustment of approximately $4 million. That has been the change, Madam Chair. That was discovered during reconciliation of the first bill that was adopted and then worksheets that were put out, and that's where the difference of the sum was found. This new bill now reflects the 16 million, which will contain GMH appropriation, and that's why it's lined through. We're not removing it. We've identified that revenue in the 16. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Dueñas. Senator
Madam Chair,
Sinagas,
and
you are
that's correct.
recognized.
I was going to identify that, but he got it right.
Thank you very much.
And there's a new section?
Please clarify the new section, Senator San Augustine.
Clarify the new sections? It's lined through, so it eliminates it because it's already incorporated in the 16 million.
Yeah, but on page 10, there's a new section.
Yeah,
Section 9.
the new section, Madam Chair, is the Public Defender Services Corporation and alternate public defender.
So this
That's the
was,
new section.
so this was not in the governor's proposal, correct?
That's correct, but it was during the public hearing that we
Alright.
needed to include it, and we were waiting for the numbers, and the
So
numbers came in.
those changes to strike out and to add that new section, and then to change the totals in the revenue projections and the totals in the title of the bill. Those were the changes that were made. Thank you. I have no objection.
Thank you. On the motion to accept the bill as substituted in the committee of the whole, as amended, there's been an objection. All those in favor, please signify by raising your hand. Motion carries. Senator San Augustine.
Now we can go ahead and move on to the presentation of the bill, and the round table of who's going to ask questions or whatever.
Okay, we have a new version of the bill, so we began with the first round of questions, and since this is a new version of the bill, we'll allow to restart the round of questions. And we began in the back with Senator Fisher. Senator Fisher. Again, colleagues, this first round of questions, you have 10 minutes. Okay.
Objection, Madam Chair. This is a new bill, so it should go back to the original 5 minutes as standard.
Okay, there's been an objection
Hang on.
to the 10
Point of order,
minutes.
point of information, Madam Speaker. We never get out of Committee of the Whole. Committee of the Whole already set the standard. It already set the standard. We never got out of Committee of the Whole, so it still stands.
There's been an objection to overrule the chair. So we'll have to take a vote on your objection to overrule the chair to keep the 10 minutes for this round. So all those in favor of overruling the chair to go back to the 5 minutes, please raise your hand. Okay, motion fails. So again, colleagues, we have 10 minutes for the first round of questions. Senator Fisher, you may proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I yield my time, rather, to Senator Terlahi.
Thank you very much. Senator Fisher's time has been yielded to the Speaker. Senator Kanata. Senator Siniklis.
I yield my time to the distinguished gentleman over there, Senator Blas.
Senator Perez.
Stu Mossi, Madam Chair. And thank you to the panel for your patience. Yeah, I guess a couple of questions. Can you, for the listening audience, can you explain what is not covered in this general pay plan? I understand the nursing, the teachers, law enforcement officers have their separate pay plans. But within the rest, can you basically clarify what is not covered in the general pay plan?
Took a brief recess to address our technical issues. The Committee of the Whole is back from recess. We'll take a moment before we get into the questions. I apologize, Senator Perez. We'll give us our guests here, our panel today, to give a brief overview of the pay plan that is proposed. So, Mr. Byrne.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. There are 5 pay plans in the government of Guam. The general pay plan is clearly one of those. Previously, the nurses pay plan, the law enforcement pay plan, and the education pay plan, the teachers, were addressed separately and were discussed by this body in the previous in the 36th legislature, and they are in operation. So the next plan to come up was the general pay plan, which includes the bulk of the government employees. DOA has a statutory duty to study these pay plans actually every 3 years. DOA undertook this duty, and as is mentioned on page 2 of the pay plan that was submitted to the governor, we are required to include in this study a consideration of internal equity and external competitiveness when we produce a recommendation for the pay levels that will be recommended under this plan. DOA chose a number of benchmark positions in order to gauge the competitive wages that are paid for the positions that are included in this plan. It actually undertook a fairly rigorous survey of 203 positions in the government pay plan and compared those positions with the pay that is prevailing for their equivalent positions on the mainland. We avoided the 2 coasts where pay plans tend to be much higher, and we looked at pay plans that are prevailing in the central part of the United States, which was deemed to be much more comparable with the prevailing costs and conditions on Guam. These positions are all set out on pages 4, 5, and 6 of the plan that was submitted to the governor. Internal equity, which I mentioned before, is one of the factors that were used in order to make this determination. And as a result of the study that was done, and it was an extensive study, and I would like to make note that the HR department of DOA worked really, really hard on this, and I commend them for the hard work and the thoroughness which they applied to this study. But the pay differential percentages as a result of the study that was done are set forth on page 7, and they vary from basically from 1% to almost 100%. In order to make this workable and in order to make this applicable to the government of Guam, DOA then took a weighted average of these differences so as not to bias it in favor of, you know, the really high differential and the really low differential. It took a weighted average, so the original unweighted difference was about 45%, But when we took the weighted average and corrected it for the distortion of the premium pay for the higher costing positions, we arrived at an overall adjustment to the base pay of those people that are covered by the general pay plan of 22%. DOA then put these positions together, and I will actually ask Shane to explain how that was done, because his department did it, in order to make sure that people were placed in the right positions. And he'll explain how that wage classification category slotting is done. There was a similar process done for the other 3 pay plans already in process, but he'll explain how it's done for this one. We then made that recommendation to the governor, and the governor accepted the proposals that we made for a 22% increase in base salary. The background to all this is that the government and Guam employees, and in particular those employees covered by this pay plan, have received no increase in their base pay, and I will clarify that in a minute, but they've received no increase in the base pay amounts for 8 years, and even the amount that was paid 8 years ago was based upon data that was 2 years, which was 2 years old at that point. So basically, government and Guam employees had fallen behind 10 years in pay equity. And that's what this study seeks to correct. That amounts to something like, if you've worked in the government for all those 10 years, it amounts to roughly 1.7% increase per year, which is actually much lower than the pay increases that were prevailing under the federal government, where they attempt to make this adjustment annually to correct for inflation. But if you compound 1.7% for 10 years, you get to 22%, and that's how we work that particular statistic out. The last thing that we recommended in this pay plan is that this adjustment be made on a more frequent basis. And we recommended that we should have annual pay adjustments starting next year in order that we don't fall behind again. Quite well understanding that we fell behind in the past few years because of the fiscal distress of the government, and that's the reason why these pay increases weren't awarded at the time they should have been and at the time they were earned. But that fiscal distress no longer exists, and now is the time to make the adjustment that's due. It's an adjustment that we feel is fair. It's an adjustment which we feel will help to stem the flow of people out of government service. It's becoming more and more difficult to recruit personnel into government service because of the pay levels. Sometimes we're able to recruit them for a short time and they move on to other jobs. We want to keep people in government service. We want to make sure that they want to stay, that they can afford to stay, and that we keep their experience so that we're not retraining people all the time. So all that is behind this particular pay plan and the study that went behind it. But if I can just ask Shane to talk about the slotting and how we actually do that also when we actually implement this plan.
Thank you, Director Byrne. Briefly, so how employees get impacted on the implementation of this plan.
The study was conducted based on the positions in the government, and we priced the positions according to market. The director went through the methodology of how we did that. So basically, in the past, implementation has been done numerous ways. The simplest, most consistent way to do it is a basic step-to-step implementation. So let's say you have an employee who is, let's say, a maintenance custodian. At step 2 of their pay grade, they'll be slotted straight into step 2 of the recommended scale with the respective grade for their position. The reason why we chose this route is in the past we've had issues with compression within the pay scale, compression within the departments, and it caused a lot of employees to perceive the implementation as unfair. And one of the ways we went back and looked at it was saying, in the past, there have been step-to-step implementations in which it has a smooth transition into the workforce. So that's our recommendation for this pay plan update. And it does cover a vast array of positions. I believe there's over 1,000 classifications or positions covered by this pay plan. Not all of them are in use. We have a bit of work ahead of us at DOA to kind of shore that list up. But within that, it covers over 3,000 employees under the general pay plan. So, in these, you have your regulatory type positions, you have your science positions, your biologists, your chemists, you have your administrative positions. Every other position that is not basically a nurse, that is not law enforcement, and that is not an educator. So that's, hopefully that answers some of the questions on who's included. And the simplest way we chose to go about trying to implement this is to just give them a straight slotting into the new pay scale.
The people in this pay plan support the government. The people in this pay plan support the law enforcement personnel. They support the nurses and they support the teachers. Government won't operate without these hardworking employees. So this plan seeks to correct the long-standing anomaly that's existed because we were unable to pay, as I said, because of the fiscal distress. We're able to do so now. So we brought forward this plan and we're asking for this body's approval for the funding for it. We want to start paying from April 1st, which is only in a few days. So we're seeking approval for 6 months of the remaining budget fiscal 23 year to pay this plan. And then going forward, these pay rates will be included in the annual budget that's submitted to this body for approval, which will be in August. So we thank you for the consideration to this. We feel this is critical to keep the government operating at the level that it can operate and should operate.
Thank you very much, Mr. Byrne and Mr. Nauta. Now we'll go back to the first round of questions. Senator Perez, you're recognized.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair. So just to clarify, do the autonomous agencies qualify for the 22% increase?
This plan does not apply to the autonomous agencies.
Okay. And then I've also heard that, so I mean, that's good to know because we definitely want to address the inequities, right? We always hear about the, autonomous agencies attracting, the more experienced workers from line agencies.
Yes, Senator.
And so that's good to hear. In regards to, I've also heard about how some line agencies pay more for the same job. In fact, they pay more for less. I've heard that the same position, but one does more than the other, and they get paid more with less work. Is there anything to address that inequity within the line agencies?
I'm actually not sure what you're referring to, but maybe, Shane, you do know.
I think if we knew specifically Generally, all positions that hold the same pay grades, outside of those that have differentials, for instance, the social workers at CPS do have a differential specific to being at CPS. So in that case, yes, maybe, but their base pay, based on their pay grade, will be the same. So if they have the same pay grade, they should have the same base pay. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. So for those that are hired above step, so this would also give them the bump in pay? Because is the increase tied to the position?
The increase is tied to the base pay of the position, yes.
So people who were hired above step would get the increase as well?
Yes.
Okay. In regards to, so just to clarify, so in your submission, the Competitive Wage Act, so everything listed here has been increased 22% for, so for L1, L2, L3, so all of those in that table has been increased 22% across the board.
Yes, Senator, that's correct.
Okay. Is unclassified also covered?
There are some unclassified positions that are covered. They're few and far between. Most of the, and I guess some of the clarification that's needed is we do hire classified positions as limited term and temporary appointments, but they're in the unclassified service. So to clarify the difference between an actual unclassified position versus a limited term or a temp appointment employee in the unclassified service. So to answer the question, yes, there are some that are included, but it's very few.
So I know we have the customary practice of, you know, for those positions that are vacant, we hire those that retire. Is that also included in this?
If they're being hired in a temporary status to a classified position, then yes, they're included as well.
So like when teachers retire, they're often brought back to fill in the vacancies, would they get the increase?
Under the general pay plan, I think one example is a Department of Revenue and Taxation. They get the ability to hire retirees. It would cover them as well.
Okay, yeah. All right, thank you. So, you know, I know this is a huge, you know, I guess move forward, right? You know, a lot of our workers, like you said, have been, you know, carrying on the work of the government and not getting, you know, the increases, especially in response to inflation now. It's much needed. So I guess, you know, one of the concerns too is perhaps, you know, the sustainability of, can we sustain this? Because I know once we give the pay raise, we want to make sure we continue and not, you know, take away from it. So is that something we can do? I mean, I know EITC is reimbursed now these days for it, but do you foresee this as a sustainable?
Yes, Senator, I addressed this in the press release that we issued shortly after the pay plan was published, that we do believe that this is sustainable. We do believe that the increases that we've seen in tax collections is not a flash in the pan. It's been sustained now for 3 years. As a result of that, we've achieved a surplus in the general fund, and with the military build-up, the amount of construction that's going on, and then when the construction is complete, and the Marines for whom the construction is being made move to the island, plus, of course, the additional wealth that this plan itself creates, will sustain an ongoing ability to keep on paying these wages.
Okay, so one of the concerns I have, so you passed out a document that shows the amount per agency, what was, I guess, estimated to be the amount that's needed per agency for the increase. So in Guam EPA, there's only 27,000. I know they have more workers than that. 27,000 for the whole agency, as far as a 22% increase.
Yes, Senator, this schedule that you're referring to only includes the salaries that are paid under the local funds. There's a number of employees, and EPA is certainly one of those that are paid with federal funds. That's not accounted for in this because they don't have to be budgeted for, and that's what this particular schedule was meant to address.
Yeah, so that's one of the problems, because they tend to have a status quo budget. And so every year, they're taking money away from that grant, their consolidated grants, to fund their salaries, which means less in operations. I think that's a problem, because that means less capacity, less ability, and especially EPA, they have a critical shortage of workers. They're trying to recruit people and retain people. They've stated in many public hearings, many engagements that we had, that their workers are getting poached, right? They're getting poached from, federal government, for instance, which can pay double, private sector. And so I think, if we're going to prioritize, this critical agency, I think it's a problem that we're basically compounding the problem for these agencies to function. And so I have a concern about how we've dismissed the actual estimate, which I got to be roughly about $500,000 for the year, but it'll be $255,000 for the 6 months until the end of this budget cycle. Can DOE commit to, fixing this issue? Because, we're deprioritizing an agency that's critical to our island.
Let me be very clear that we're not suggesting, and the general pay plan certainly doesn't contemplate, that federally funded employees won't also receive this increase. That's certainly not the case. Federal funded employees will receive this increase. Agencies that are concerned about their grants not covering this need to return to their grantor and explain that this is a general pay plan. The federal government has never yet not covered increases as the general pay plan, and as I explained earlier, the federal government itself pays pay increases to their employees. So they're committed to pay these increases to the federally funded employees in the agencies that they fund. EPA is one of them, certainly. Most of the federally funded employees are in public health. And armed with this information, and of course it does require this body to fund the local employees, but each agency will go back to their grantor to make sure that the federally funded employees are fully funded and that there's no impact on their other programs.
Okay, so I guess this is something we can continue the discussions, but I think one of the concerns is that, so we, in the last legislature, we did a bill to allow them to build their headquarters, and so the concern was that they may have to detract from that funding to go towards the pay raises. And so that's one of the concerns that I have, that, we want to ensure that they're able to build their capacity. I just want to put that on the record, and we'll definitely, communicate with them further.
Yes, Senator, and of course, the purpose of this pay plan is to pay the increase to those employees to retain them. If we're losing them because we're not paying the enhanced salaries, this certainly is designed to help prevent that.
Okay, appreciate your responses, and thank you so much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Perez. Senator Brown.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Director Burns, if I listen to you, the world is wonderful, and I think that would be a nice place to be, but you said that you believe that these increases of revenue can be sustained, so I would like to ask our finance office to at least provide us at least a listing of the amounts of revenue and expenditures for at least the last 10 years, because we think we'd like to see that trend. Because up until 3 years ago with this pandemic, the only other time I recall, at least in my time in government, that the revenues exceeded the expenditures was during the Blas administration. Every year since then, we pretty much have had to address the juggling act financially to cover the increased cost of government. And I certainly would not want to see in any way that we put this pay plan in place and then we end up in a situation where a year or 2 or 3 from now, we cannot pay it. You're alluding that if we have the military buildup, once the construction's completed, that the revenues from the additional increased presence somehow is going to cover all these costs. So I'd also like to ask the Finance Office, because a number of pay increases on what we determine to be very critical positions for our nurses, our doctors, I mean, let's go down the list of priorities, our police officers. I'd also like to have those figures provided if we can tomorrow, so we can actually look at how much we've increased the actual cost of government. In those cases, I think we could say we determine those to be the most critical positions because that's what our people want to see prioritized. Our teachers, law enforcement. The general pay plan you projected, you're saying essentially that this is to retain employees. But I think the challenge is, certainly from my perspective, is what we look at as most critical positions and how do we maintain critical positions. We continue to compare the federal government. We're not the federal government. We have nowhere near the resources of the federal government. And in some cases, we're probably going to continue to lose certain positions to the federal government because they have far more resources than we have. You're indicating that, over the last 3 years that we've had this increased revenue, and what do you attest that increase to all of a sudden after all these many years, the last 3 years? What do you consider those increases of revenue coming from all of a sudden? What's changed that we have all this money that we're swimming in?
Well, thank you, Senator. I'm not one necessarily with a reputation for thinking everything is wonderful. You should ask my staff in the agency. I'm not over optimistic. I try to be realistic. So, in response to your question about why have we managed to turn around the fiscal difficulties that the government fell into, I think there's several factors. The first one, of course, is we've managed to have the federal government pay our EITC and CTC payments to help fund our tax refunds. Always a drain on government funding, always a concern for cash management at DOA, is how do we pay these refunds? We don't have that problem in the same way now because those payments, and they amount to like 120 million if you add together the CTC and EITC payments. Those payments are funded by the federal government. Economic activity has also increased, and that can be seen in the 2 factors that BBMR often point to when you look at our revenues in the CRER. One is the increase in tax withholdings. Tax withholdings are paid by employers who employ staff who have the withholdings held back from their wages. So that is a fairly good indicator that wages, private sector wages, and of course there's some public sector wages in the withholdings too, but and obviously the increases that we've been able to pay to those other government employees has helped in that respect also. But those have increased, and also BPT has increased, which means spending has increased. I see, and I don't have any information that would lead me to think that the trend that we've seen for the last 3 years is suddenly going to change, especially with these new factors that I was talking about. When we have federal employees here when we have the Marines here, our Section 30 receipts will increase because that is one of the sources
How
of
much do you
Section 30.
anticipate Section 30 will increase with the so-called 5? So I guess now we're going around the number of what was 8, now about 5,000 Marines to be stationed on Guam. What do you calculate that to be?
Well, we have, just off the top of my head, and I haven't been able to research this fully to answer your question, but we have something like 3,000 employees, federal employees or federally based employees that contribute to the 70 million plus, and I think we're going to get a little bit more, 70 million plus Section 30 receipts. So with 5,000 Marines, I don't anticipate each Marine is going to be paid as much as some other federal employees, but I don't see why it wouldn't almost double the amount of Section 30 receipts.
So you think it'll go what up to 140 million? What do you think it's going to be?
Yes, it could be 120 to 140 million.
Could be. And you don't think that the major cash infusion from the pandemic has elevated our revenues?
Well, it certainly stimulated spending. Of course it has.
Well,
but as I said, we've had the 120 million that arose from the pandemic is an ongoing commitment. It doesn't end when ARPA funds end. And we haven't yet even seen the impact of the infrastructure spending. There's a large amount of infrastructure spending that is funded by the federal government. So I certainly don't, and I'd be very interested to hear if there were figures that would controvert that, but I certainly don't think that for the foreseeable future that federal spending and economic activity is suddenly going to decline. Certainly not enough to justify not paying these employees that have been working for the last 10 years and not receiving an increase.
well, I'd like to look at specific figures, though. I mean, how much money are we talking about? Because, I mean, you talk about the EITC, and we were looking at what annually we paid about $60 million a year. These proposed increases right now would essentially eat all that up. Because we're only looking, what, at the remaining 6 months of the fiscal year, and this bill went from 16 million now to 21 million.
Yes, Senator, I just mentioned that the EITC and CTC payments together are about 120 million.
Yes, well, I understand, but I mean, I think I'd like to look at actual figures rather than we anticipate economic activity. I mean, we knew that at the end of our previous administration that you were a member of. We anticipated the next 10 plus years that we would see the increase of federal activity on Guam that certainly would be a benefit. But how much are we talking about? Because when you get to dollars and cents, we're looking at specific increases that are going to add on indefinitely to the government of Guam costs and to the taxpayer base. And if decisions are made to roll back the BPT, because there are members here of this legislature that when they were running for office last year promised that part of their agenda was to roll back the BPT, and that's going to take a significant chunk, assuming that it were to pass. So, I mean, how much money are we actually talking in dollars and cents? Because when you increase costs by millions, not just by a few million, by 50, 60 million, on top of, like I'd like to have our finance office report how much we've increased the budget just with increases last year moving forward. How much are the dollars and cents to that? Because we like to see how does it add up? Because we've been in situations time and time again, we have employees, but then they'll come back and report they don't have the resources to do their job because there's no funding for their equipment, supplies, and other things that they need to operate. And the public itself wanting to see, greater improved service out in the community. I mean, there's definitely a need to see how all that money is going to add up into improved services out in the community. So it would be nice to know what those anticipated figures are, because I've lived in a time here where most years we've not had that revenue. And if we are relying on Uncle Sam, because it doesn't sound very important, I guess, for the private sector out there that's still struggling in the tourism industry, it doesn't sound like it matters whether they exist or not, because it sounds like we're going to be reliant on Uncle Sam to pick up the tab. So it'd be good to have specific dollars and cents of what you're looking at with the increased military activity that you assume is going to continue after the base is completed?
The estimated annual costs for the pay adjustments are set forth on page 14. So it's not
I'm
an
not
unknown.
talking, again, I'm
it's
not
not an
talking about
unknown
the
number.
anticipated amounts of the increase that is being looked at here. I'm talking about the revenue.
Well, I don't have definite amounts of expected economic activity. I've given you some examples of additional revenues that the government has been able to bring in because of changes in conditions, most of which are permanent changes, like the 120 million that I mentioned before. I don't think it's unreasonable to suspect or even estimate that 5,000 people, 5,000 additional people living on this island is not going to bring some benefit to the local economy.
I understand, but again, I think it's all hypothetical because I would like to know what those figures are. What are we anticipating in actual dollars and cents? Because when we approve these increases on top of all the other increases, on top of the other annual inherent increases that come with government, even if we don't add another person to the list, that cost goes up, and there's a very definite cost to what that is. So it'd be nice to know whether that's going to equate to what you may anticipate we may be gaining in revenue. Because there's going to be a specific dollar amount that's going to have to be met in order to meet all these additional costs that are adding, because this is unprecedented in the history, not so much about this pay increase, but the increases that have been added over the last several years in the government. It's unprecedented at this level. Not talking a few $1 million here. We're talking 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, $100 million adding on as if it's nothing. So from our perspective, certainly from mine, in approving increases, I want to make sure that we're not in the same situation and coming up short, especially to see most recently, I mean, if we've been in a time of plenty, I mean, the fact that our school system has been deteriorating to the level that our children don't even have a safe environment while all this money's been floating around. I mean, that's the kind of stuff I know members of our public, raise a big question mark. So while we anticipate these things, I mean, if we don't have specific figures of what that's going to calculate and what that's going to be, then that's just a little concerning to me in moving forward with these huge amounts of obligations, which everything in the kitchen sink literally gets thrown in, whether it's viewed as a priority or not. And that's a concern that I have with regards to being proposed without specific amounts.
Every budget is an estimate.
I understand, but it's based at least on an estimate of what you anticipate of previous revenues coming in. But if we're going to determine our future moving forward for the next upteenth years infinitum on the last 3 years, then, I got to wonder about that. I don't know that that's necessarily going to be the case, and that's the concern. I don't like making obligations that I cannot pay. I don't do that in my own personal life and my financing. I certainly don't want to obligate the public, and again, I understand the importance of government employees, Director Burns. Many of us have all worked with government employees over the years. We ourselves have been government employees, so it's not that we're unsympathetic to that. But I also want to make sure moving forward that when we obligate our people to these large amounts, if there's going to be large amounts of revenue, that we have an idea of what those amounts are that are going to cover that cost. I want to ask a question also because you talk about how there's just been no, we've not addressed this pay plan, but have increments been paid out to government of Guam employees over the last 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years?
Increments have been paid where increments have been earned, yes.
So I want to clarify that too, because I know that question has been raised with regards to members, because I don't know about you, but I've had people calling me up with their questions and their concerns and the things they want and the things they don't want to see with what's being proposed. And that's one of the things that was brought up. I think we do need to clarify to the taxpayers out there that increments have been paid. And granted, they're on performance, but they have been paid, and that's calculated according to what their salaries are.
Yes, Senator, but I would point out that those increments have still left these employees with wages less than the reference group. Otherwise, because there's the reference group.
And what is the reference group, Director Burns? How are we referencing? How are we determining these amounts? Who's the reference group that these amounts are being determined by?
It's set forth in the pay plan. the 203 positions that were studied.
And how
is
do
the
you
reference
measure,
group.
who are these positions being measured against?
Again, it's set forth in the pay plan that is being measured against their equivalent salaries that are being paid to
In the private sector,
people that are doing
government
the
sector?
same position. There was some private sector information taken in, and I'll ask Shane to talk about that. But the principal reference group is public sector employees in the United States, in the areas that I just mentioned, which are not the high-cost areas. And as I also mentioned, the difference between the salaries that are earned on Guam and the salaries that are earned in the mainland, in some cases, are very, very high. Do we want to allow or just stand by and wait for government employees to abandon the civil service and go to the mainland? Some have. Some have a good reason for doing so. But it's a danger, you know.
I know,
to my
Director Burns,
mind-
but you're
to
speaking
my
in,
mind,
you're
it's a-
speaking in generalities. You're speaking as if every government position would require that. And I mean, when the legislature, some of them I did not vote for because I didn't vote for the last two budgets, prioritize what they determined to be the most critical of positions that they wanted to fund. There are positions in the government that we've determined are the most critical that we would support seeing those type of increases. But you make such generalities as if every position in the government is critical and needed, and we should prioritize that. And I appreciate the relation to the mainland, but we're not the mainland, and we're not generating the same level of revenue that the mainland may generate when you're making your determinations. So,
Senator, as I said earlier, we can't run the government. We can't, without these people.
we can't. I mean, the government of Guam has operated for goodness many, 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 many years, even through the slimmest of times, and has still been able to operate. So I don't necessarily agree with you that we
Well,
are having
I
massive
guess-
exodus,
I guess
massive
we'll have-
exodus of employees, because I would be supportive, Director Burns, of a lot of the lower paying positions in the government of Guam that definitely I would like to see those positions increase. But I don't have a lot of sympathy, and I myself have been one of them, for high-paid positions that may not be determined or viewed by members of this legislature as critical.
I would like to address one of the points you made earlier about the continuing commitment. And I think at least two people, government employees at the public hearing, said that they would rather be paid what they're worth now, even if it meant that they weren't paid in the future. I don't
Yeah.
anticipate that
My time is
happening.
up at this round, but I beg to differ. I think when the reality sets in, I don't think they would be as happy if their salary were cut in a year or two because the revenue was not there.
I
With
can
that,
only
thank
tell
you,
you what
Madam
they
Chair, for
said.
the opportunity to ask questions and comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Brown. Senator Lujan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Burns, earlier you were saying the sustainability of this pay plan was based on, Sarge, can you move the chair a little bit so I can see Mr. Burns' face? Yes, thank you very much. Mr. Burns, yes, earlier you were saying the sustainability of this pay plan was based on a few things, the EITC, the reimbursement, or finally the EITC, military buildup, and then the sustainability of that is after the military buildup, of course, the 5,000 Marines and the continuation, of course, of the buildup and families coming out here with the military side. Is that what I'm hearing? Is what I heard correct? That the sustainability is based on that?
The sustainability is based on a number of factors, and you mentioned some of them, yes.
Okay. Likewise, the rollback of the GRT from 4% to 5% is the sustaining of the GRT at 5%. Is that a big factor as well?
The governor said in her State of the Island address that she does not recommend, and it isn't her policy, to reduce the BPT.
It is in her policy?
It is not her policy.
Okay. No, I've heard the same thing because I've personally met with her, and she said in rolling back the GRT from 4 to 5%, that we're going to lose in excess of $60 million in GRT in construction. The problem I have there is that the OPA report was just released. I think it was last week, week before, where it says that the capture rate and most of the general contractors have been paying 4.19% GRT based on exemptions. And the unfortunate thing about the exemptions is that they're unverifiable. The smaller subcontractors, as I'm getting numerous calls, I'm sure even our colleagues here as well, the smaller contractors that don't have the exemptions are paying at 5%. The bigger contractors, the general contractors, are mostly paying 4.1%. So if the burden of the GRT is based on the smaller contractors at 5%, and they're the ones making up the 60 million, versus the general contractor that's paying 4.1%, and likewise, again, because the technology, and I'd ask the oversight chair of technology to conduct an oversight regarding the capture rate, because unfortunately, revenue tax and the technology we have right now are not able to accurately capture what is really happening out there in regards to monies that are being exchanged and contracts that are out there. And they're estimating, the OPA is estimating, I think, to the tune of about $22 million that is suspected that is not being collected at this point from the general contractor. Madam Chair, sitting right next to you, her and I are sitting in the tourism committee. She chairs the committee. You never said. It sounds like we're writing off tourism at this point because of the numbers are just not good. I mean, the PDN report today says arrivals up 691% from last year, but still 59% down from pre-pandemic February numbers. And so my question to you, Mr. Burns, is this. Should the tourism, should our numbers just flatten out and not return? And there's, again, there's some folks out there that are saying, we don't think those numbers are going to return. I'm optimistic, I think they will. But if those numbers don't return to pre-pandemic numbers, if tourism flattens out, would we still be able to sustain this pay plan based on what we used to rely on a lot for our funding?
Thank you, Senator. We're able, from the numbers that we have from the CRER, which was, I believe you got the CRER earlier in the week for the year up to February. The numbers demonstrate that we can sustain it at the tourist rate we're getting now. So I see no reason why it shouldn't in the future. You know,
So even if it doesn't return, we still be able to sustain it, and that's the scary part of that. That is a big unknown. We know we have a big military buildup. We know they're going to continue to come. We know we're going to have missile defense systems out. That we know. We don't know. Again, we're optimistic. We're trying our darnest to be able to get the tourists to return. But again, if we turn into a big military installation, would they come here and visit 18 missile defense sites? You know, I don't know. So that's what I'm saying. That portion of it, and again, I mean, of course, you're not relying on those numbers. It sounds like we can go ahead and write off tourism. Even without tourism, let's take away tourism right now. We can sustain it without our tourism market. Is that what you're saying?
We can't anticipate a disaster. What I'm saying is two things, Senator. One is that the numbers that we've been able to generate, the collections that we've been able to generate, and yes, the public auditor spoke about some difficulties in collections of BPT, and I think he mentioned that it was of the order of like 20 million.
Something like that, yeah.
That he thought was
He thought, yes.
that was a cost, a collection that we hadn't been
Sure.
able to collect. He mentioned that, but even with the conditions that we've got now, we can, and assuming that nothing changes, right? Like you say, we're able to sustain this pay increase now. Maybe we should think of it this way, you know, the amount we pay to our employees is a government cost. The amount that we pay to our vendors is a government cost. We try, but we are generally faced with increasing costs for materials and supplies, and still we can sustain that. Payments to government employees is a government cost, and if we don't pay those employees the market worth, and I would disagree with Senator Brown on this, we will lose people. We are losing people. And we don't want, you know, you ask us, you, the body here, ask us to undertake certain tasks. That's going to get more and more difficult if we don't have the experts on those subjects retained within the government. So it's a government cost. We try and anticipate that cost, both for materials and supplies and for the cost of employing the right people in the government.
Yeah, and I understand. I understand all that reasoning. I'm just saying because it used to be again a major leg of our economic prosperity here in Guam, our self-sustainability, basically with that, and I'm hoping we're able to do even more with that. But it seems like now we're relying more, and it is what it is. Relying more on the federal side, you know, the EITC, which is great, but also on the federal side. And so and again, a sitting committee on tourism, how much are we relying on this in regards to sustainability? And should, again, the bottom fall out in regards to this, and we have to anticipate that as well to happen. And if as you're saying, if the numbers remain flat right now, we can still sustain it. But if it declines even more, the sustainability is still there based on what you're saying in regards to the revenues that are coming in based on federal contracts and the EITC. What I'm hearing as well, and I can't verify, I haven't been able to verify is this as well, is that the Biden administration in regards to their economic plan basically is to remove the compact impact reimbursement. Now, if that should happen, that portion that comes to Guam will, how much of a dent would that put in based on the revenues that come in as well? Because that's part of monies that we rely on as well.
Yeah, yes, Senator. But unfortunately, we don't get anything like the amount of money that
Sure.
we need from.
Sure.
It's only something around 6 or 7 million a year, whereas we believe it actually costs us much more.
No, and we used to get more than that. We used to get that money. Now we share it amongst the other island nations. Yes. But again, losing $6 million is $6 million, and again, this is. I'm just looking at all these things that are possible scenarios that we may lose, or may even worse, a decline on revenues that we used to rely on. But now you're saying basically that the Section 30 money will increase, of course, the EITC that's coming in, and over the buildup, and then after the buildup, the sustainability of that. So basically, our reliance on funding is based on this gigantic fortress buildup here in Guam.
That's, when we talk to the rating agencies, they are always concerned about our concentration of wealth from tourism and from the military side. But the military side certainly has compensated for whatever difficulties we're suffering from on tourism. Mm-hmm. But actually, I think it was 2 nights ago, we went out to eat in Tumon, and my wife looked up at the number of windows alight in the Hyatt Hotel, and almost every window had a light in. So perhaps we're not doing so badly.
Well, I mean, and one of the things too, because I know it comes construction or contractors coming back from the United States looking at possibly bidding on contracts here in Guam, and one of the things that is actually dissuading them in doing as such is the housing component that they're going to have, the H2 workers. But and that's one of the reasons why I'm asking, because if in fact tourism were to decline, flatline, or even just fall at the bottom here, there are going to be a lot of housing here in Tumon for construction workers. And do that, and I know now they can only use a percentage of those because they have to be reserved, of course, for tourism. But I'm just saying, well, we need to start thinking again ahead as you're projecting these monies coming in. We also look at the areas in which we sit and the vice chair of is our side of the house in regards to tourism. Because you haven't mentioned anything, and it is what it is. Again, you know, it's not a major factor at this point in regards to our economy, right?
Yes, that's absolutely true. We all have a different way of evaluating risk. We've evaluated the risk in this, and the risk to us of foregoing this pay increase it outweighs the risk that I guess might be inherent in the general economic conditions. Because I don't see. We've seen an increase in revenues for the last 3 years.
Okay. Now, the last thing is, as well here is, again, if the OPA report is correct in regards to the majority of the contractors are, with the exemptions, are paying for 4.19% GRT, and so and we're still collecting that amount. If they're not paying the 5%, but 4.1. I think it's about time that we can go back to 4% if in fact they're not paying the full 5%, and it's the smaller guys that are paying the 5%, and the bigger guys are having all the exemptions and unverifiable.
Well, I think the public auditor wasn't reaching that conclusion. I think he was reaching the conclusion that we should.
Well, I'm glad you're not the tax guy, because the tax guy would never agree with anything. I mean, the higher the taxes, the more he's going to love it, or she's going to love it. But anyway, thank you, Mr. Burns. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Senator Lujan. Senator Blas.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good evening, gentlemen. Thank you very much. I sat there listening very intently, and I take a different approach to a lot of these things, and I appreciate the study. Thank you very much. And I'm going to go ahead and make reference, and some of my questioning is going to be based on what's on this document. Page 1, you basically says that there are 5 different pay plans within the government Guam. Okay? Is there, or do you currently have pay plans, or is there a pay plan in effect for all 5 categories?
Yes, Senator, there are currently pay plans for all the ones that are listed.
Okay, so let me go from the bottom up. Executive pay plan, who does that cover?
That covers all the heads of agencies, statutory and generally appointed employees of the government.
So have you done anything with that pay plan over the last 3 years?
No, I haven't.
So basically it's not.
Yeah, it's not,
okay.
Hasn't been addressed.
Attorney pay plan?
No, we have not addressed the attorney pay plan.
Okay. You have here, of course, the education, or let me go skip this here, because one of the things I don't see here is but you do talk about it in the body of, is the law enforcement officer pay plan, or pay that was addressed, right?
Yes, that's correct.
That would generally fall under what category in the 5 pay plans?
It'll stand as its own pay plan. The governor rolled it into the CWA after the review was done.
Also, although the CWA established 5 compensation plans, and these are the specific plans, the governor created a sixth one.
The law enforcement pay plan was already in effect via statute, and what she did was, once it was updated, included it as part of the Competitive Wage Act.
So, but where would that fall in the CWA, law enforcement?
Oh, it'll fall as its own standalone pay scale and pay plan.
That's not what I'm saying here. I don't see anything here. It says LEO. It says the CWA established 5 compensation plans.
Yes, originally, when we first did it back in, I believe it was 2009, it did have an LEO pay plan component. When it was rolled back in, I believe, 2011, it went back to the way it was prior to that. In 2013, 2014, the CWA of 2014 only had the 5 that are listed in the front. So when it was updated recently, that is when the governor rolled it back into the CWA to address them together.
Who updated it recently?
Currently, I believe we updated it in 22, 21, 2021?
Oh, that was to accept the plan.
Updated.
It wasn't to create it, was to accept it.
Yes, correct.
Okay.
It was to amend it, yeah.
So in other words, she created her own, a 6th plan.
In the CWA, yes.
Yeah, thank you. Okay. How much did you pay LEO?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear
The LEO pay plan. What did it amount to in as far as percentage for law enforcement?
We adjusted the base pay for the pay scale at 18%.
18%. Okay. Okay. The nurse pay plan. That obviously went into effect, and well, first off, so the LEO pay plan. How was that rolled out? How was that promulgated? How was that made legal? There was a plan then that was submitted to this legislative body.
There was already statute that established the law
There was a
enforcement pay plan.
statute that established, okay. And so how was it rolled out? I mean,
The statute, like other statutes for the pay plans, instructed DOA to review it and make a recommendation to update.
okay, and then what did DOA do after the
And then
recommendation?
what we did is we made the recommendation for the 18% and submitted it to the governor for approval.
Okay, and then how was it? So governor just went ahead and says 18%, go ahead?
Yeah, she approved it, and
But she did this under an executive order, right?
that's correct.
Okay, so she used an executive order, which is basically a legal document that basically, and she has in her power to be able to do that, right?
That's correct.
The pay plan for the nurses, how did that happen? Same. Well, first off, what was the average that percentage you gave to the nurses?
The nurses, we gave a base of a 15%.
15%.
increase.
Okay.
And then they had additional differentials depending on where the nurses are.
But the base was basically 15%.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And then with the nurses, the 15%, and that was promulgated, if I remember correctly, there was actually a law that basically stated that it needed to be done, right?
That's correct.
And just a matter, just turning the information over to the legislature, just bless it and let it go, right? I remember, because I think that was Senator Torres's law.
Yes, previously.
Right? So basically it was promulgated by public law, right? And this general pay plan, and thank you very much for having it here. I mean, one of the reasons why you're here is because basically the CWA requires that after you do the review and everything, it goes through the scrutiny of this body so they can be able to, because you need the money to be able to implement it, right? So it has to go through this process. Am I correct?
That's correct, Senator.
Okay, good. Teachers' pay. Okay, so in May of last year, and I remember seeing the memo that you had written up, Mr. Burns. The initial recommendation was for 16%. She crossed it out and says, I'm going to go ahead and give 20%. Okay, so we get the 20%. What authority did we have to be able to spend to give those raises at that time?
The study was conducted based on the other updates that were done under the Competitive Wage Act. So I believe when the 2014 Competitive Wage Act went into play, it did ask for a plan to be created. In that plan that was created back then was the educator pay plan. So that's where the update was.
Yeah, that's the update and everything, but how did you promulgate it? How did it become legal? How did you legally begin to pay? Was there any executive order?
That award was made under the Competitive Wage Act.
No, was there any well, the same thing with the law enforcement pay and the same thing with the nurses' pay. Was there any executive order for the teachers' pay?
No,
No, there wasn't. I know that because there wasn't.
law enforcement doesn't come under the Competitive Wage
But
Act.
it was under the executive order.
And that was why an executive order was needed.
Oh yeah, but you see that again, didn't come under. It doesn't obviously doesn't come under the executive pay plan. Didn't come under the attorney pay plan. Doesn't come under the education pay plan. Surely not the nurses' general pay plan. But it was promulgated and it was and it was made legal. Basically, there was a legal document, basically the executive order that says it can happen. The nurses, it was by public law. We sitting here, and thank you very much because you're sitting here, just proves my point that you need legislative authority and authorization to spend money to be able to start something. But I go back to the teacher's pay. And here's the concern that I have. Although this body made it legal from September or October 1st, 2022 on forward, there's that gap that we have just decided that we were going to go ahead and forego anything else and we're going to just do this unilaterally and just get away with it. Okay.
Well, Senator, we had that discussion
Yeah, we did. And you never came up
during the budget hearing.
Yes, we did. And you never came up with the answer because there was no answer. Because you wanted to be, we said, look, henceforth, this is what it is. But you know, the thing is, there's still a liability on this thing. I just want to point that out because I'm not done yet. Okay?
Well, thank you, but I would point out that the budget funded those increases.
After October, starting October 1st. Because, okay, there was basically from the previous budget, there was a process that was supposed to have happened that you guys neglected, you didn't want to do because you felt you had the authority. So in looking for the authority, I was looking for it. The only authority that I saw was a memo signed by you. Last time I checked, okay, Mr. Burns, as great a gentleman as you are and as great as I like you, I'm sorry you don't have the authority to be able to authorize the 18%. Oh, by the way, it was 18%, right, to the teachers? How much was the 18, 20%?
18.
18? No, I think it's 20% because my wife got it. Okay. 20%. And now we have a 22% pay increase. 18, 15, 20 to the most critical people that we have working our government. They're all the sole reason, the reason why government exists. You know why government exists constitutionally? Okay? For protection, okay? For education and for health. The three places that we have, 18, 15, and 20. And then we base this on 22%. Talk about priorities.
I don't think it's a question of priorities.
I didn't ask, that wasn't a question that I needed to respond.
You have to look at the differential.
Yes, and that's why you gave me 18% for law enforcement, 15% for nurses, and 20%, which I corrected you for teachers. Don't worry, it's not your fault. You didn't make that decision. I'm just pointing it out to the people. Okay? Next. And I appreciate that you did a number of studies that you did, and one of them you did, your studies was based on prevailing conditions in the United States, primarily in the Midwest. And then in another part of this report, you basically did a comparison study based on government to government between the line agencies and the autonomous agencies. Okay? And one of the questions and one of the concerns that was brought up by my good colleague Senator Brown was, first off, prevailing conditions in the United States, not necessarily, although you can find some places where they're probably the same size as us in as far as, the number of people, but demographically and geographically, much, much more different. There's a lot more flexibility for an individual to be able, if he wants to only make $15 an hour in Butte, Montana, okay, and with the opportunity 50 miles down the road to be able to get a better salary, he's able to do that, not here on Guam. So what I've done is I've gotten, and I'm sure you've gotten a copy of this, okay, on your desk. Let's do some true comparisons as to what we're doing here, okay? It's kind of interesting that in this document that I passed out to all my colleagues, this is a comparative analysis of the salaries of the basically hourly earnings, okay, of the private sector and the government sector, because I think that in one of the things, in the campaign towards this effort, towards this pay raise, there was mention, and this is why I wanted this more specifically, there was mention of the comparison of government of Guam employees with the private sector employees. The average pay we pay for a Gov Guam employee in June 2022 was $35.39 an hour. The average pay for a private sector employee was $17.13 an hour. Okay? And I bring this, because as we talk about revenues and we talk about, and don't get me wrong, I agree. If we can afford the raises, we should provide it. And I agree, but I'm also going to talk about this a little more, that for many years, because the government has been in financial stress that it has experienced, that we had to forego pay raises. But along the same lines, while we talk about the government needing the revenues, sometimes in government we forget where the revenues come from. And I get it. You're just with the Department of Administration. I get what your line responsibility is. I get that you don't have to worry about where the money is coming from. You more so have to be concerned about how the money is being spent in the government. And quite honestly, Mr. Burns, one of the things I got to commend you, you are a hard-nosed when it comes to having to spend money. I appreciate that. Okay? But as the representative of the government sitting at this table, unfortunately, you're going to be the individual that I can shoot at. Because along those lines, in as far as the revenues, we have a private sector community that is still suffering. Let me ask you, Mr. Burns. Has the government over the last 3 years had to lay off any of its employees?
Senator, you remind me of a saying that you remind me of a saying that a British civil servant said to me many years ago, that a problem shared is a problem doubled.
Is a what?
Problem doubled.
Okay. So can you answer my question? Has the government, any of the government employees experienced layoffs in the last 3 years?
No.
Okay. Has the government had to institute furloughs for its employees in the last 3 years?
No.
Okay.
Although we were very close to it when I first came to the job, but very fortunately we avoided it.
Yeah.
No doubt because
I remember those.
No doubt because of my hard nose.
I remember those days.
Yeah.
Okay, I remember those days. But over the last 3 years, do you know how many private sector businesses that the government relies on to conduct businesses so they can get business sales, so they can pay their tax? You know how many of them had to shutter or close down their business or restrict it and had to furlough their employees or lay off their employees?
No, but I do know that the latest figures that came out for unemployment was something like 4%.
4% of unemployment. That's not including the number of people who had to leave the island because they had no more jobs, right?
I don't know.
Mr. Burns, I know full well how you answer questions, and that's why I say stick to the questions and stick to the that I'm asking for. Okay, don't add conjecture to it because I will come back to it, okay? Anyways, okay, so.
I think I've got to answer them the way I feel I must answer them.
Well, you know, I'll tell you what, somebody in here has got to stick up for the private guy, okay? And gal, I'm sorry, okay? And I'm not to say that none of my other colleagues, but I need to ask those questions. Because the reality is, as concerning is this, all government is concerned about is spending and getting the money. They're not worried about how the money is earned. And somebody's got to stand up for that person who's required every 20th of the month and every year to be able to pay 4 or 5% taxes in order for the privilege to do business. You know, you made a comment earlier, you says, we can't run the government without money. You're so true. But government a lot of times forgets where the money comes from when it's making its decisions. You know how many private sector employees are sitting at home right now and saying, what about us?
I don't, but perhaps you'll tell us.
Yeah, well, I'm sure that's a good amount, a whole lot more than just 4%. Because the 4% represent individuals who don't have jobs. It doesn't represent individuals who now have had to take jobs at lesser pay, lesser hours. Okay? Which government employees hadn't experienced. Okay? And other than these raises, another concern that government employees have, so I've got it, say, other than the merit bonuses, the pay raises, what about things like the merit bonuses? Have we factored that in? Or are we going to be addressing that?
Merit bonuses haven't been paid.
Yeah. Maybe we take care of the debts that we owe to these employees that we relied on in government first?
Yes, we should.
I appreciate it. Thanks. And then let's go back to this disparity in as far as, what was provided to law enforcement and what is being offered to the other employees. An employee, a law enforcement officer who makes $40,000 a year got a $7,200 pay raise. A non-law enforcement employee who's getting 22% is now going to be making $8,800, about $1,600 more than the law enforcement officer who only got 22%. The Guam employee who just started, probably making only $25,000 a year at 22%, is going to have a raise of about $5,000. So that means then his annual salary will increase to $30,000 a year. At the same time, a government employee who's going to get who's making $150,000 a year and earning at 22% pay increase is going to get about $31,000 a year in pay increase. In fact, that $150,000 a year employee is going to get a pay increase that exceeds the amount that $30,000 employee is going to be getting in his annual salary. And we throw a word around like parity. Tell that to the guy who truly needs the money, truly can appreciate the money, but it's only fair. Last question for now. Have these estimates, is this figure that's provided enough to also cover the benefits that are going to be increased, the benefit amounts that are going to be increased as a result of this salary increase, or is this just base?
That's the base salary.
That's just base salary. So this did not include what then the government, more that the government would have to contribute because now we've increased that salary by 22%.
That's correct.
Okay. Whew. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you very much, Mr. Burr.
Thank you, Senator Blas. Senator Parkinson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Byrne, Mr. Nata, thank you. Just a quick basic question for everyone at home. Can we afford this? Brass tacks. Can we afford to do this in our budget?
Yes, Senator, that's why I'm sitting in front of you.
Fantastic. Could you please tell me a little bit about the retention rate in terms of employees? Are you guys having difficulty with retention and employment?
Thank you, Senator, for the question. Yes, there is difficulty in retention. In the past few years, we have seen a lot of tenured employees leave, which has left a lot of the less experienced employees to try and step up to the plate and take those roles within the government. But it also goes back to recruitment. It does make it difficult to backfill those lesser roles in the departments that they left. So you find a lot of employees wearing 2 or 3 hats, stepping up to the plate to become a leader in a leadership role while still trying to conduct their work in the lower levels.
I gotcha. So just for the record, do you know what the current unemployment rate is?
The latest figure I saw, which I believe I read in the newspaper day before yesterday, was 4%.
Okay, so that's typically pretty low and kind of suggests that we're in a laborer's market. Does that having an effect on your retention as well?
In all probability, yes.
Okay. You know, I've heard this pay raise as being categorized as a big plot to give 6-figure employees in the line agencies all the monies in the world. I note that Mr. Natsa here is one of the people who has a salary higher than 100K. I believe Mr. Natsa actually represents 50% of all the people affected by the line agency increase. Do I have that correct?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Nata, as somebody who represents 50% of the entire 100K increase club, do you believe this is a secret plot by the governor to give you a pay raise?
My answer to that's no, and I guess as a comment to that, you know, the spirit of the study isn't based on the person holding the position. The study is conducted on the positions that the person holds. That's how they're priced. That's how we determine what market pays for them. You know, the aspect of an actual employee and the position they hold and how that's addressed is through performance, and that is linked to their salary increments annually or on whatever schedule they're on for their salary increments. This is a flatline way to look at positions and what positions are paid. You know, what you'll see as far as higher salaries when we were asked to look at positions that earn, you know, up 80,000 and above, right? There are a lot less now because of the retention rate that I spoke about earlier. Generally, we had a lot of managers, high-level supervisors who were in that range leave, you know, due to retirement and other reasons. But as attrition was escalated through the pandemic, you start seeing those salary levels drop, right? The other thing that we have to take into consideration when looking at those salary levels are time and service, right? A lot of these employees who are at those levels have been in the government upwards of 15 years plus, sometimes 25 years and over. So the percentage that's given across the board is to be consistent, to make sure that the tenured employees that we have still want to work with us and are paid fairly versus the employees that had just started. one of the other reasons why you're looking at an across the board in that manner is, the government has tried it in different ways, and we have had compressed salaries. I believe our chief economist, Gary Hiles, mentioned that at the public hearing, where he stated that he felt disenfranchised because he got cents to the dollar the last time we did this. That was by virtue of a different way of implementation. This time around, you're looking at a step-to-step adjustment in which everyone gets to 22%. It took upwards of 3 to 5 years to sort through all the grievances and complaints that came out of the last implementation in 2014 due to compression. A lot of employees, after a while, understood what compression was, but may not have accepted it, but understood what it was. Step-to-step implementation ensures that we maintain that movement. And the percentage increase, as stated before, yes, based on the straight matrix mathematical equation for it, someone with a higher salary will get a larger amount of money, but the percentage is the same, based solely on the salary that they earn as a base salary.
If this body were to entertain amendments to give the people on the higher end of the scale pennies on the dollar, would this lead to more wage compression?
Yes, it will lead to wage compression. It'll also probably have consequences deeper than just compression. If you change and amend how something's implemented without looking further into how it actually impacts an employee, it could be grounds for grievances, for complaints. It'll set the tone because it's actually based on an employee and not a position. Whereas in the study that was done was based on positions themselves.
Okay, and from what I understand, the general pay plan, the last time there was an adjustment was in 2014, correct?
It was in 2014, but the data that was used was actually from 2010. So you're actually looking at the adjustment for the general pay plan being over 10 years overdue, and on top of that, the general pay plan is usually addressed last and was usually in the past given the least amount of attention as far as percentage. Sorry, go ahead.
Excuse me for interrupting. Yeah, because you said it was deprioritized, but isn't it required by law that there needs to be an adjustment every 3 years?
It is required, and over time, the adjustments when the studies are conducted, a lot of it is due to funding, which is what the director mentioned earlier. But when looking at it in totality, you'll see a 22% recommendation for the general pay plan for 2 reasons. One, it covers a vast amount of positions across the government, a vast amount of industries, right? The other pay plans are homogeneous in nature as far as the industries they serve. But in this pay plan, it covers so many different positions. And on top of that, the increases given in the past to this pay plan weren't as large as other pay plans.
All right, would it be fair to characterize these pay raises as more of a catch-up then? Because 22% seems big, but if we missed 3 previous pay plans, does that kind of make up for the previous ones we missed?
Yeah, that was what I was trying to explain to Senator Blas. You can't just look at the percentage, because if the law enforcement base pay that he was referring to was started out higher, and we're comparing it to this reference point that we did it in the same way. Obviously, the increase that he was speaking about, which I think he said was 18%, means that there was less of a catch-up required for those employees than is required for these employees in the general pay plan.
Okay, so just in theory, if we were to follow the statute of the law and revisit this again in 3 years' time, it would be a much lesser adjustment because we're not playing catch-up. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I heard in the previous testimony that to make the pay plan more affordable, you actually weighted it down. I heard weighted it down by 45%. Did I understand that correctly?
Yes. What we did was, if you took a simple average of the differentials, it was something like 45%, but that didn't adjust for the number of people in each wage band. So we weighted it for the differential in each category in order to get a reasonable result. because that, obviously, a 45% result would have been unreasonable, and that's
extreme.
just a statistic. We didn't want to just use a bare statistic. We wanted to use an informed statistic.
I appreciate the judiciousness there. I have to ask though, with you not following the full 45% as in the formula, does that mean that even with the pay increase, we're still not at our most competitive level, at least pay-wise rise?
There are some categories that aren't in the most competitive level. That's certainly true.
This pay raise, I know, is going to go help a lot with retention. Will this affect, are procurement specialists included in this pay raise?
Yes, sir.
Good. I would hope that DOE doesn't need to borrow from GPA anymore if their procurement specialists could be a little bit more competitive.
It's certainly our plan to make sure that we have a fully staffed procurement division, certainly.
How does this rate compare with the basic rate of inflation since the last adjustment? Like, do we even keep up with the basic inflation, or are we just playing catch up on that?
Well, as I mentioned, if it amounts to about 1.7% per year over the last 10 years. I don't have the actual amount of inflation in my head, but I suspect over 10 years, 1.7% is at the real low end of inflation.
I would agree with you, Mr. Byrne. Could you give us an idea, a sense of scope for the attrition that the government has faced from lack of parity in pay?
As far as attrition is concerned, kind of the discussion went through similar to when we did the law enforcement pay plan. Attrition has occurred in all levels, in all categories, basically. The most critical ones, the biggest issue is when employees leave categories and positions like social workers and others like that. Trying to recruit fast enough and have them stay, having new applicants and employees stay is a big issue. So attrition is compounded on the main fact that a lot of people end up, leaving, and for various reasons, right? But compensation being one of them.
Since the last pay adjustments that we've seen that have come recently, have you seen an increase in the number of applicants for jobs since implementation? Are you seeing more applications for LEOs, law enforcement officers?
In regards to law enforcement, so in some of the agencies, yes, but some of them, no. There is interest in employment in general, but for instance, GPD and DOC have a hard time getting people to, want to take the job, right? I've had numerous discussions with the police chief and the DOC director, and, there's a lot of reasons that go into that, but trying to keep up with, filling those vacancies is difficult. On the GPP side of the house, to the point of DOE borrowing, employees from GPA. On our side of the house, engineers, for instance, right? We've had a lot of work come through DPW, and just trying to get, basic engineers to want to apply and work with us is difficult, mainly because the pay. And other positions, public health, right? They have a lot of positions that, by virtue of the pandemic, have come about to be very priority in preparation for anything that might come down again. CDC coordinators, eligibility specialists, things like that. It's just hard to recruit overall and retain people that are already there. So having an additional tool of better compensation is something we want to offer
I'm just trying to get a sense of, how much the previous pay raises are leading. Because I understand it's hard to hire, but I'm really looking at just applications. Are people showing the interest? Because that's what's really important. Are they even showing the baseline interest? So for firefighters, are we seeing an uptick in firefighter applications as well?
Yes, for the fire department, we usually don't have huge issues getting a lot of applicants. Same with the customs department.
What about with teachers? Have you seen an uptick since the teacher pay raise?
I haven't seen actual data from DOE, so I'm not sure if they actually had.
What about for nurses?
Well, the big initiative with the nurses at the time was to have the ones that we have stay. Nurses overall, I don't think we see upticks in a lot of their recruitment, but that's nationwide from what I understand. It's trying to keep the ones that we have in place, and for the ones that we can grow locally, have them stay here and work. But I haven't seen recent statistics from the hospital. Public health, it's been limited at public health.
Has it at least done something to help reduce our dependence on foreign nurses, the traveling nurses club?
Yes, definitely the salaries help, in that respect.
Okay, and I got a question about staffing at GRTA, because I know a lot of them are being funded by limited appointments. When they get off the temporary appointments, will we be able to handle them with the budget on a more permanent basis? Because I know by statute, most if not all of the employees at GRTA need to be classified. Does this take into account that potential change down the road?
In my office's discussions with GRTA, yes, they are in the mode of trying to classify and permanentize the employees that are on limited term.
Okay. Is it true that during a time when tourism was our #1 industry, and we're having the pandemic, that the government was successful in eliminating the budget or the budget deficit before the pandemic and the influx of federal funds? Because I've been hearing that the economic turnaround was before the pandemic. Is there any truth to that?
Yeah, the first surplus that was reported was the year before the pandemic.
So we were on the path to economic recovery and before the pandemic in terms of cleaning up our books.
Yes, fiscal discipline produced a surplus before the pandemic.
With tourism back on the rise, would it be plausible that government revenues will increase sustainably to cover these pay adjustments long term?
Well, that is what I was trying to say earlier, that based upon everything that we see, that is the most likely outcome.
Okay, I thought that's what you were trying to say earlier, but I just need to be clear. It's a long night, so forgive me if I'm treading over covered ground already. How about when the Marine Corps base starts to hire administrative roles and other similar roles employees that fill the general pay plan? Do you think you'd be able to compete against the military bases once they start to have a need for support personnel?
If we don't pay competitive wages, I'm sure we will lose civilian personnel to support the military, the Marine Corps base.
Is this one of the reasons why it's important to plan for the large number of hires the DoD and federal government will bring along? Like, do you guys have a long-term plan in place for hiring to take into account this mass attrition we know is coming?
Most of our, we're operating on budget year to budget year. So long-term planning, unfortunately, isn't a factor that we can allow ourselves, other than we are certainly concerned about the number of people who are eligible for retirement, who, based upon their service, have a large amount of institutional knowledge, and when they leave, they take that knowledge with them. I think Mr. Garter was talking about people at the higher levels of expertise were leaving, and we're replacing them with employees at more entry-level pay, and that's one of the things that's being seen that's moderating our pay increases, but it doesn't help run the government when you lose your most experienced personnel.
Yes, I understand that. Human capital is important to what we do here. From what I understand, I spoke to the superintendent of schools. She has told me that there's been a drop of maintenance people at schools from 300 to 27. Do you see similar, just wild numbers and drops in fill-ins around the government?
I don't think we've seen anything quite so dramatic, but we do have drops, and maybe want to address that.
Do you foresee any additional losses, crippling losses in institutional knowledge with the upcoming retirees? There's a whole cohort of baby boomers that are about to retire. Do you foresee that being problematic in the next few years?
I think it could be a problem, yes. And obviously, it's our job to make sure that we mitigate that as much as possible. We want to train people, we want to give them experience, we want to allow them to train themselves, and we want to allow them to feel comfortable in the job that they're doing.
Okay, one of the things that has always been levied against the government is that you guys are greedy and sitting on a giant pile of gold, and you're paying people with pay raises, and you're not prioritizing the rest of the island. So just for the record, I'd like to ask you, how much has the government spent towards small business pandemic assistance, subsidies, business rent subsidies, LEAP programs, and other programs that went straight into the pocketbooks of the average citizens?
I don't have that number in my head, Senator, but it's north of 100 million. Certainly.
Bob, would you say it's closer to 200 million?
It could well be, yes.
Okay, thank you. Where do you think raises to government employees get spent typically? As in, if a government employee gets a raise, do you believe those funds go back into the community? Where does that money go? Does it disappear to Amazon? Like, does it help our own community when we give pay raises?
I'm sure a large, and I think I mentioned this before, that a large proportion of any pay raise would go back into the community. Most of the services we get are community services, and we still have stores open, we still have restaurants open, we still need to spend money on our own personal repairs and maintenance, and all that is done on island.
Okay, I appreciate that, sir. And just to, wrap this up and bring us back to the beginning, just we're crystal clear for the viewing audience, can we afford this? Is this going to sink the Titanic if we pass this pay raise and bring down the whole island?
No, it won't bring down the whole island. It needs to be addressed.
Mr. Nata, as representative of 50% of the 100K club in the line agencies, is this a secret plot to just give you a pay raise?
No.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Byrne, Mr. Nata. Madam Chair, I appreciate your time. Thank you, and I yield the rest of it.
Thank you very much. Senator Barnett.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good evening, Mr. Byrne. Good evening, Shane. Thank you for joining us. I first wanted to start with the retention. I know that the idea is that if we give these 22% raises, it's going to help with retaining government employees, right? Because I mean, all through all the literature I've seen on the raises, there's a big problem with people leaving government service because they're just not getting paid enough, right?
Yes, sir.
So I just want to, maybe if you could explain, as the oversight chair of the Guam Police Department, we just had Chief Ignacio over here, and as well as the Department of Corrections, where we gave law enforcement. And if you could just run over the numbers real quick. So Department of Corrections, Guam Police Department, what percentage increase did they get? Was it the 18?
Thank you for the question. With the Guam Police Department, yes, they got the base pay of 18. They also, within that recommendation, had a differential plan, 10% and 15%, based on what position you hold within the department.
So it was an 18% increase with an additional 10% for certain positions and an additional 15% for others?
Correct.
Okay.
And the additional differentials, the 18 was to try and help with recruitment, the additional differentials to help with retention.
And what about Department of Corrections?
Department of Corrections got the 18% base, and they had already had a 25% correction institutional pay for their department. So they had a 25% prior to the 18%. So they get both as it stands.
So in the Guam Police Department, some officers' pay was increased a total of 28%, and others was the 18 plus 15 to 33%, correct?
GPD was base 18, 10 and 15% differential, DLC base 18, and a 25% differential.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. See, the question I have, and I definitely support the general pay plan raises for the hardworking general pay plan employees. I don't want to raise for anybody who's not a hard worker. But I'm just trying to put it together in my mind. Maybe you can explain when I hear from the Department of Corrections and the Guam Police Department, and they were on the receiving end of these raises, which again, I understand the motive and the justification for it and everything, but if they received these significant increases and they're still struggling with not just retention, but recruitment, and you just said yourself that, they're not getting the number of applicants they need, and I think it's no secret that law enforcement across the board, to include customs, which is, I believe, according to what they tell me, they're staffed at 30%, right? So if the thinking is that we're going to give these increases, which again I support, and we have given some increases way north of 22%, and it's not improving the recruitment and the retention, could you just maybe explain for those people viewing how a 22% increase across the board for general pay plan employees would accomplish what the law enforcement increases and the other bonus increases that they got didn't?
So one of the main reasons for the recommendations is, yes, to address recruitment and retention, but it's also to, when looking at compensation, if you don't keep the scale moving, and with the general pay plan, right, as I stated earlier, it's based on data since 2010, right? So if we're already looking at a decade-old pay scale, essentially we're bringing in general pay plan employees from salaries back in 2010, which we can already see is not competitive, mounted with the competition we get with our own autonomous agencies, but with the federal government and the military buildup. And of course, a lot of people leaving island for other opportunities. If we don't make a recommendation in that vein, then we keep ourselves in the position that we are currently with having a non-competitive compensation. How that will affect and how that will impact recruitment, of course, like everything else, will need to be seen. Under the general pay plan, right? I guess looking at the business community, a lot of the positions that are regulatory in nature that businesses have to deal with to open up, a lot of those positions are covered under the general pay plan. When those agencies that house those positions aren't able to recruit, it does complicate things like getting permits and everything like that.
Sir, if you don't mind, could you provide some examples of those positions?
So if we're looking at positions at Department of Revenue and Taxation, the positions at Guam EPA, that was referenced earlier, positions at DPW, things like building inspectors, even at Department of Labor, you have GOSH and OSHA inspectors, things like that. If they're not able to recruit or they're not able to attract people to take those positions, then it has a ripple effect in all the services that the government provides. Under the general pay plan, it houses all of those positions and all of the support positions to those functions, which also include those positions that affect law enforcement, public safety, and everything else. So a lot of the conversations that our department has with those department heads is, what can be done? Not too long ago, I had a conversation with the SHPO on, hey Shane, I'm down to one archaeologist. What can we do to, kind of get more archaeologists on board, because, we have to work on the military buildup projects. And compensation-wise, an archaeologist can get paid almost what they dictate based on their rarity. But, it's situations like that. It's maybe one or two people that he needs, or three, but compensation to address that is part of the tools that are needed to try and bring people in. Because even with higher compensation, as you've seen, it's still yet to be seen on whether it helps.
Right, but we can only afford to go so high, right? So with this 22% increase, and I forget, I read through your letter, Mr. Byrne. How closely would that align us with, comparing these salaries with the states?
The raw differential that Director Byrne spoke about earlier was 45%, but the weighted differential was 22%. So that's just to get somewhere in the neighborhood of where the positions probably need to be. But there are other positions that would require an even further adjustment as far as compensation is concerned.
What types of positions would those be?
Like the archaeologists, the engineers, positions that market will dictate astronomical salaries for, but we try to figure out where we can meet a department middle ground, because we got to consider budgets and funding sources with them.
Are there other factors you think that, besides pay, that lead to disparities in our ability to attract certain types of positions, like maybe, for example, our geographic isolation, et cetera?
Yes, definitely. As far as geographic isolation, we one of the things we take into consideration, like the director said, is taking a look at central states in the mainland. It's not a direct comparison, and we won't ever get a perfect comparison. Hawaii is also not a perfect comparison for us, right? Because there's too many factors to take into consideration. But when looking at jobs, for instance, there's a lot of household positions, the engineers, biologists, things like that, that every state, district, county, and city has. Taking a look at those and seeing where those salaries lie compared to ours is kind of where we, make that comparison.
We also can't share services because of the fact that we're a long way from the mainland.
Sure.
We have to provide every service ourselves.
I wanted to ask the autonomous agencies in your letter that you provided to the body in January. It's a great letter. Really makes the case for the general pay plan increases. But I just wanted to quote from your letter here relative to autonomous agency / department pay. I believe this is page 11. It has become apparent, I almost want to read this in the British accent. It has become apparent in more recent years that the ability for autonomous agencies and departments to make adjustments to their compensation structures while the GPP has remained stagnant has had an impact on internal equity and created a situation where line and other autonomous agencies and departments lose employees to those autonomous agencies and departments that have very competitive salaries. Adjustment of compensation schedules within those agencies and departments has created a new factor to the local labor market in regards to competition for critical manpower resources. And this is something I hear about a lot, right? And so you mentioned that we lose people to the states, right? People leave and they go move off to the state to get a better job. And then I also hear that, for example, in the case of law enforcement, we have officers who are going to become security guards at Camp Blas or, becoming security guards on the naval base. That being said, how competitive are the autonomous agency salaries compared to their stateside counterparts? And, well, I guess if you just could answer that question first.
Yeah, I don't think we have the information because we didn't study their relative pay to the states.
Right. Okay.
But just speaking, personally, I think in the last 3 months of 2022, DOA lost 3 employees to autonomous agencies of one sort or another. And some of them even said, they're doing work that's less demanding because, frankly, DOA's work is pretty demanding. They're doing work that's less demanding for more pay. And we've tried to address that in here. I hope we've managed to make some difference, and I don't think we've lost anybody in the first 3 months of this year, at least to those agencies. But their pay is set by their boards, and I don't know that they provide any justification for some of these adjustments.
Right. Also, the judiciary of Guam, right? I was kind of wondering, and I don't know if this is a question for the author, but I want to read from a letter, a public hearing testimony from Chief Justice Robert Torres. And so the judiciary of Guam, and I'll just quote here, a mandate for internal equity and external competitiveness. Title IV GCA mandates that our employee compensation be based on internal equity and external competitiveness. While we possess the legal authority to adjust the pay scales of our employees, the ability to implement those adjustments is subject to the availability of funds. For example, after the governor of Guam raised the base pay of law enforcement officers by 18% last year, the Judicial Council approved only a 7% increase for probation officers and deputy marshals and a 6% increase for non-law enforcement court employees to ensure internal equity. And moving along here, they say to prevent further loss of court employees, the judiciary has reviewed the cost of applying the Department of Administration's recommendations. The estimated impact of paying salary adjustments to judiciary employees is $1,049,263. And that figure represents an approximate 15% upward adjustment rather than a full 22%, as employees have already received their 6% increase. And I don't know if this is a question that you can answer, but if the judiciary is able to raise their own salaries, then why are they included in the bill?
The funding for the judiciary comes from the general fund. So any increase that they pay, they're expecting to come from an increase in their allocation from the general fund. So that's why they're asking.
Okay. And then you also talked about, what was it, Senator Parkin had said and just maybe a translation here, he keeps saying you're 50% of the employees who earn over $100,000 in the line agencies?
Yes, and I believe the question or the statement is reference to those line agency employees that earn $100,000. And in my response, yeah, there were quite a few tenured employees that did. And yeah, currently as it stands, covered by the GPP, there's 2.
So there are 2 employees in the GPP. This is just line agencies, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
And because there's, just discussing this issue with some of the colleagues, right? I think that, and I know I spoke with you, Mr. Byrne, before the hearing. We're wondering, was there a way to kind of chip away at this 22% increase? Just trying to make it make sense, right? Because you do have some of those high-end earners, and I'm sure when you do the math to give a high-end earner an increase that, that reaches an amount that equals, like a low-paying employee.
Well, to put it in context, Senator, there's about 3,500 employees who are affected by the general pay plan that are locally funded. Of those, there's 2 that are earning more than 100,000, as you say.
Right. How about, what if we lower it and we say, how about 80,000 and up? Do you have those numbers?
I'm just about to give you those numbers.
Thank you.
There's 16 that are earning 80,000 to 100. There's, I think, 280 odd that are earning 50,000 to 80,000. But as you can see, the vast majority of those covered by this pay plan are earning less than 50,000. The people at the top were affected by the compression that was put in the last time the pay plan was instituted. So that actually compressed their salary and is one of the reasons that they didn't earn competitive rates, is because their increase last time that this was debated was artificially compressed.
And if I could add, right, trying to I guess hone in, right. One thing to caution would be to we don't adjust pay based on the employee themselves, but when you take a look at the positions that are in these ranges, right? Let's take a look at those that are between 80,000 to 100,000, right? These positions are large positions. They have higher pay grades because their jobs have greater impact and greater scope.
Could you just reel off some of the position titles?
Sure. Some of them are the Deputy Financial Manager for DOA, right, to oversee all the general fund, Chief Environmental Public Health Officer, Chief Procurement Officer, Chief of Aquatics and Wildlife, Administrator of the Office of Civil Defense, Community Health Center CEO, Chief Economist, Chief of Cadastry, Personnel Management Administrator, Psychiatric Social Service Administrator. So you see, these are all the managers that keep the government together and keep the teams moving. So that's why our study is based on the positions they hold and not the actual employees holding them.
Understood. I just wanted, because I have the Guam Memorial Hospital Authority staffing pattern, and they are included in the bill, right? And I understand that what we're trying to do is make salaries equitable, either with the autonomous agencies or the positions stateside counterparts. And so that being said, I was researching the average pay stateside for a pharmacist, for example. And it's about $130,000, right? And based on the research I did, that was the number that came up. And so I'm just looking at some of these, and not to single out the pharmacists, but if we're paying pharmacists $124,853, $128,723, $124,913, $131,999, $121,099, $141,000 for the chief hospital pharmacist, healthcare administrator, $121,000. These are all different positions. But I guess what I would ask is if it kind of looks like these positions are already at a level where they're competitive with their stateside counterparts.
Yeah, I'm not sure because I don't have the figures that you have in front of you, Senator, but a hospital pharmacist is generally paid very much more than a pharmacist in other circumstances.
Sure.
But you may be right, I just don't have those
I mean, I'm not arguing that they don't deserve it. I'm just saying if they're already getting paid what the pharmacists in the States make and we're adding on an extra 22%, I mean, we might have like 1 million pharmacists coming to Guam to work.
It may be, but I can tell you, the time that I was at the hospital, these pharmacists were having to work very long hours because they didn't have enough staff. They couldn't recruit enough pharmacists.
So you anticipate that won't be a problem if we pass this 22% increase?
It should mitigate the problem.
Right. I wanted to ask for my GDOE people, I did have a question in here that was sent in from a constituent. Now, this is relative to one-to-one aides and just other aides in the public school system who are limited time, full-term employees. They qualify for annual sick leave and other benefits, but they don't get no increments yearly. Would these types of positions be covered under the general pay plan increase?
Yes, they would be. Especially if they're, a lot of times the limited term, right? They use classified positions to fill them. So yes, if they're under the general pay plan, they do get covered for the increase.
I wanted to kind of go back to the retention, right? And it may be a separate issue, but are you aware, because with the law enforcement, right, we've heard from the chief, other than a lack of applicants, maybe because of the pay levels, there's also an issue with them being able to pass the written exam that's required to be hired into law enforcement, right? Could you, if you don't mind, could you just speak a little bit on that?
Yeah, yes, and that's true generally, and each law enforcement department, their written tests, they have different tests. For some of the cycles, there is a lower pass rate, but generally speaking, for the entry-level positions, you're looking at about a 50% pass rate. Let's say we get 200 applicants for a position, 100 of them will pass and move on to the physical testing at that point.
Thank you. Mr. Byrne, I wasn't sure if I heard you correctly, but relative to merit bonuses, did you say that they haven't been paid or they have? Okay.
Sorry, they haven't.
They have not?
They have not.
Are there preparations underway to pay these merit bonuses out?
Yes.
Okay. And how much is that going to cost?
The figure that we came up with, somewhere between 6 and 7 million.
6 or 7 million? And is this just for line agencies?
That is just for line agencies.
Okay. Yeah, if you could explain the process behind merit bonus, because I was on your website a few days ago, and I thought it was interesting. So you get a merit bonus basically when you have an outstanding employee evaluation?
That's correct. We were required, DOA was required to reconstitute and update the process for evaluating these bonuses, both to comply with the law and to make it more of a tenable process. DOA has completed that process, and that's one of the factors that prevented us from actually paying the merit bonuses. And it's been submitted to the governor, and I believe she's on the cusp of actually approving that new plan.
I wanted to ask Mr. Shane about hazardous pay, and I'm maybe going to propose an argument here, but GDOE is facing problems recruiting facilities and maintenance staff, right? We hear all about it, right? Would you say that working in schools that pose imminent health and safety risks to students would warrant hazard pay for facilities and maintenance custodian workers in those conditions?
You know, I think I can answer that in the framework of the current hazardous pay policy for Government of Guam. Let's say you did have a maintenance personnel that worked in certain conditions. Departments, according to our current hazard pay policy, can request for an assessment to be done by the Department of Labor. Once that certification is done, they can certify which category of hazard they can get, and at that point they can be paid while they're working in that condition. The way that's been worked before, some positions, because they're in that condition as a permanent condition of their job, have been granted, like GPD, right? They've been granted hazard pay from the moment they clock in to the moment they leave. So that's the two ways that the governments address hazard pay.
In your opinion, do you think that GDOE maintenance and facilities personnel would be deserving of hazardous pay?
Thank you, Senator Barnett. That'll be your last question.
I think, I mean, if they've gone through the process to establish the hazard and what kind of condition, I don't see any reason why not. Yeah.
Speaker Terlahi.
Thank you. Just to clarify, Shane, if GDOE wanted to classify them as hazardous positions, you're saying there's nothing anyone else needs to do, that already exists, that process?
Yes, there is a current process. I haven't talked to their personnel office on how they administer that. So if they do use it, the process I described would be the way that they would be able to get it. Otherwise, it is done through statute.
Okay. All right. I'm going to start with the bill for my questions. So on the first page of the bill, it says that that DOA is allowed to review compensation and establish, these policies based on Hay methodology. Is this Hay methodology that you used?
Yes, that's correct, Senator.
All right, and it says, and to delegate authority to assess and update the unified pay schedule to certain agencies. Was this authority delegated to any agencies by DOA?
No.
No, you did it all, right?
Yes.
Okay. And so then on the next page of the bill, it says that, you, pursuant to this authority, submitted to the Governor of Guam recommendations for a general pay plan update, which the Governor approved for implementation beginning April 1, 2023. That means this pay plan is going into effect regardless of what we do. Is that correct?
Sorry, Senator, going into effect?
Yeah, regardless of what the legislature does.
The governor has the authority to implement the pay plan, but the legislature has to appropriate the funds to pay for the pay plan.
All right, well, we didn't do that for any of the other pay plans, and the governor was able to find money and implement them on her own. So technically, she has that power?
Yes.
All right.
But in this particular case, because we have a balanced budget, the funds have to be found to pay for this particular payment.
Okay, and so it says that the governor approved for implementation the recommendations for a general pay plan. So I want to clarify this. Did she approve all 9 recommendations? It looks like you made 9 categories of recommendations. So I'm looking at your letter on page, because what she approved was based on your letter to her, the letter that we're looking at on the floor, January 30, 2023, from DOA to the governor. And on page 12 through 15, it talks about, or 14, it talks about the recommendations, and so there are many of them. So is it your opinion that all of these recommendations are approved and implemented without, on your own, without any other action necessary by the legislature? Or is it only if you look at implementation, after all the recommendations, it says, DOA will issue formal guidance on the proper slotting of employees and any other administrative actions necessary to implement any approved recommendations. So which recommendations do you believe are approved?
The governor was gracious enough to approve the whole pay plan. Some of these recommendations, though, are future activities that we will undertake once we've got through the funding of the main pay increase.
Yes, okay, so I'd just like to look at these. It looks like even with this pay, and then attached to this is a table, right? So attached to your letter to the governor was a table called the Government of Guam General Pay Plan 2023. The previous pay plan table, doesn't it exist in statute?
I'm going to ask Shane to respond to that, but my understanding is that it was attached to the previous competitive pay law.
Right, it was attached to the law. I've seen it, I think, in the code. So I was wondering if this is intended to replace that, or people are just going to find this on your website somewhere, and how does that work?
Yes, I mean, yes, it should replace what's in it's in the codified law, and it should replace that. Yes.
Okay, and before I get to the detailed recommendations, you said that you based this pay plan, the 22% raises, because you looked at, and I'm looking now on page 8 and 9 of your letter, where you laid out occupational categories. You told us how many employees are affected by these occupational categories. You told us the average salary per annum, and you started with like a pay scale of 32,000 as an average salary, if a clerical and related. And then the highest one here I can find is this 55,677, which is category 12, administrative, managerial, and related trades. And if we added 22% to these, so where we're looking at an original range from 32,000 to 55,000, it would change to about 39,000 up to 67,000, right? Adding 22%. My question is, why did you stop at 55,000? Do you believe this to be the bulk of the employees of the government of Guam? And I think you said it was that the majority were less than 50,000? Is that what you said, Mr. Byrne?
Yes, we separated out into layers those that were earning more than 50,000. The balance are obviously earning less.
Okay, so you think it's and I just want to clarify that I heard correctly, that you said the majority are earning less than 50,000. There are only 280 who are making between 50 and 80,000. There are 16 employees making between 80 and 100,000 in the DOA's original submission of the general pay plan. And there are 2 over 100,000. Is that what?
For the line agencies.
For the
yes.
line agencies, okay. So that goes to my next question. What about in all of these agencies that were added in the new bill that we're considering by the governor, including, I would think these are the agencies where these do not reflect, like under 50,000 does not reflect the salaries in these agencies. We're talking about the judiciary. Let me look at the list. UOG. GMH. I don't know. Do you know? Do you have that breakdown as well?
Well, to help answer the question, we don't have the specific numbers for like the judiciary, but what we did see when looking at the data provided from GMH and DOE is that generally that trend is the same. A vast majority of the positions do fall within that salary range. And to help, I guess, clarify on pages 4 through 6, that gives our sample slice of positions that we reviewed. And so a lot of these positions, outside of specific ones to departments, a lot of them are shared within those agencies, especially your administrative, clerical. Any positions outside of that will fall in those higher salary ranges, right? But let's take the hospital, for instance. In the positions that you'll find in that 50,000 and below range, you're looking at a lot of therapist positions, and things that are specific to the hospital. So to answer your question,
Okay.
yes, some of them are included, but some of them may not be.
All right. All right, I'm going to get back to those specific agencies or semi-autonomous agencies soon, but let me just go back to the recommendations now. So that's on page 12, 13, 14 of the bill, of your letter. My question is, for example, you say that you're going to create an MPP, a market premium pay, to target specific issues related to compensation for positions which market demands higher pay than the GPP structure. So that means after these are funded, you might go in and create a higher pay scale for some other positions.
Yes, Speaker, that's correct. In referencing our earlier discussion that I had with the SHPO for positions like archaeologists, 22% will make up some ground for what some positions get paid, but some may require more adjustment in an effort to not adjust the whole scale to adversely impact the budget. It's a more strategic route to try and hone in on those positions, like engineers, that we'll have to pay more for.
I have no objection to that, but it says you will establish the criteria for inclusion in the MPP and make amendments to the list of authorized positions as is deemed necessary and as approved by the Director of Administration. How will we know when this is done?
We will come to the legislature. First of all, under all our principles, right? We publish on our website everything that we do. But in order to fund some of these positions, we would have to come to the legislature because they are market premium positions, and we would have to ask you for the funds for the market premium.
Okay, so you have the authority to establish this and fund these positions if you have the money. If you don't, you would come to the legislature for the money. Otherwise, yeah, I didn't realize that you had all that authority to do this. And we can find it perhaps on your website. Would this might include the SHPO, archaeologists, like you said, and social workers?
Yes, Speaker, it could include social workers as well, yes.
All right. And then you're in recommendation number 3, saying that you're going to lift the suspension of the merit bonus program, reinstate that. You're going to establish a new merit bonus program and make that effective in the next fiscal year, the new merit bonus program. And in the meantime, you're going to try to catch up with the unpaid merit bonuses that are owed, and you calculated that to be $67 million for line agencies. All right.
Yes.
Are the agencies currently paying this on a irregular basis? I've been getting some calls that some people are getting merit bonuses, some are not, across different agencies. Are they given a mandate to go ahead and pay the merit bonuses or not?
Well,
or that comes from you?
There's a difference between the suspended merit bonuses and current year merit bonuses.
And currently?
Current year merit
current
bonuses.
year.
Yes. Do you want to explain that?
Yes, so generally, we haven't paid out any merit bonuses because we have to, of course, comply with this recommendation. And the director did state earlier that we've completed the process and are just waiting for final approval for the new system to go in place. But some of the guidance we did give the departments were to get ready to pay those once approval's in place and we comply with that recommendation. And so I believe that's a process they're going through. We walk them through, who's owed merit bonuses based on performance evaluations. So there has been a lot of communication with departments.
Okay, and then it talks about, on number 5, standalone pay scales for physicians, dentists, pharmacists, and other statutory medical professionals be updated to ensure these positions are accounted for, but I didn't see those pay scales listed in the beginning of your letter where you listed the 5 pay scales. But, so in addition to these 5 pay scales, we confirm through Senator Blas that you also have a law enforcement pay scale. And then you also have now medical professional pay scale?
Yeah, so a little background on that. What happened in 2014 was we did come out with recommendations for those positions. A subsequent statute amended those positions in particular and gave it its own scale and told DOA to update that going forward. So one of our recommendations was to allow us to make those recommendations going forward. So we haven't made those yet, and that will include the dentists and the physicians. I think back then there was a push to keep the salaries higher than what the CWA back then recommended.
Okay, so that they're statutory, so you'd have to come through here to update those scales. So this GPP does not include those positions for example, at the hospital?
Well, the physician positions that we're referencing most in this would be the ones at Public Health and Guam Behavioral Health. I believe the hospital, through statute, right, can handle their medical positions on their own. So whether they prescribe to our scale or not, we're not 100% sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
So those positions at Public Health are not going to get this 22% increase right now?
When we did take a look at it, because they are contractual, right, and a lot of that was so that they can pay higher wages and get the flexibility to pay higher wages for the physicians. As it stands right now, I mean, I think we're looking at 1 or 2, but the reason why we needed the authorization to go ahead and make that recommendations is to ensure that we address those physicians right away. It could very well end up at 22 or higher, depending on what market tells us the physicians are getting paid. So.
What do you mean they're contractual? I mean, are you saying, are these employees or contractors?
No, they're employees. They do have authority in law to go ahead and contract in the unclassified service the physicians that they employ.
So are they going to get the 22% or not?
No, not as it stands.
Okay.
No, yeah.
All right. It says you are recommending that DOA grant the request from the public auditor. So does that mean, since the governor has approved your recommendations, that this is now going to be in place? That means update pay grades for accountability auditor series, OPA positions added once the MPP policy is established, and then review some of these series every 3 years. So that's just going to take place.
Yeah, that was based on a request previously, but I believe it was already handled in the Budget Act, correct? In the Budget Act.
Yes,
In
it
the
was
budget?
funded in the
Oh,
budget,
okay.
yeah.
And then it says, recommended that positions of DOA be prioritized and that new positions be instituted to capture the professional level functions and duties. Yeah, I have no objection to that. You're going to add positions to DOA, such as HR.
Yes, HR and accounting.
Procurement.
And procurement and accounting. And I think the public auditor was good enough to mention that no matter what he does, he relies upon the numbers that come from DOA.
Okay, and then on number 8, you talked about discussions on a possible pause on adjustments to compensation for an agreed-upon time frame to allow increases made under the CWA to have 12 to 24 months of experience prior to future adjustments to pay plans. This is to address the disparity between the line agencies and the autonomous agencies. You want to look at it for 12 to 24 months, but in the meantime, there really is no kind of hold on the autonomous agencies from raising their salaries. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes.
Isn't that one of the discussions you had earlier in here where you said maybe you were suggesting that we should limit the delegated authority to industry-specific employees only?
Yes, if somebody's doing an equivalent job in another agency, there's very little reason or justification for paying them more.
Is there a reason, if you think that's the case, you didn't put that in your recommendation, that just occur? That the authority for autonomous agencies to determine non-industry related compensation, or that be returned back into these pay scales?
I think we thought that we'd been insistent enough on some of these things. We really wanted to make it a recommendation rather than a mandate, in the hopes that we would bring along everybody, in particular the boards of those agencies that are responsible for setting these pay scales, that we bring them along with the logic in this pay plan.
Okay, and then in number 9, it's very clear that you are going to have the authority, effective September 11, 2022, for annual pay adjustments to the GPP pay structure at a range of 2 to 4% beginning fiscal year 2024.
That was on the basis that we were going to implement this earlier. Since the current situation is that we are asking for the funding to implement it on April the 1st, 2023, but everything is now delayed by a year because we didn't do it in 2022. So fiscal 24 budgets have included the 22%, but not another pay increase. That will be deferred to the following year.
Okay, but that is unprecedented, that the salaries under the government pay scale will be automatically, or not automatic, but by DOA, increase from 2 to 4% every fiscal year after this, without legislature saying anything. It looks like that's very possible. I mean, that's up to DOA at that point.
Yes, but as again, subject to us getting the funding from the legislature.
If this is already approved by the governor, does that need to be approved by the governor again, a 2 to 4% increase in pay every year?
Yeah, yes, it does, because she will present the executive budget that will include that.
But not the budget. I'm talking about the authority to set a salary. For example, does this give an employee the right to sue us if they don't get paid 2 to 4% increase every year?
I don't think so. It's a recommendation.
All right. Okay, I want to talk now about these other agencies that were added on to the original bill that the governor sent down. So now we're looking at the addition of the UOG, GCC, GMH, the Judiciary, the Mayor's Council of Guam, and the Public Defender. So I understand that the Mayor's Council employees, they're unclassified, but they are, the way it says it in the bill, they are affected by the GPP, government pay plan. They are affected. Can you just describe what you mean by that?
The mayor's council and the mayors themselves, when they do hire employees, they can designate titles for those employees, but generally they like to stay in line with the classified service and the pay associated to it. So when they do hire positions like recreation leaders and program coordinators, they like to align with the general pay plan. So I think looking at in the same respect that we would do it for limited term employees on the regular line agency side, the impact would occur for the mayor's council employees as well.
So that's if they designated their employees in the same category as in the general pay plan.
That's correct.
But not all of their employees are designated that way?
That's true, but they do have the ability, if they I guess deviate from the regular titles that we use, they can set compensation for their employees.
Okay, so they are able to set compensation by just stating a different title outside of this general pay plan?
Correct.
That's the mayor's council.
Correct.
All right, what about the University of Guam? Are they allowed to set own compensation for their employees, or are their employees mandated to be under the general pay plan?
I don't have exact specifics for the University of Guam, but what I do know is they do have some positions that fall under the general pay plan. For those, they do align them with what DOA administers. Everything else is handled under their academic positions.
Yeah, so the University of Guam has been in the news recently. They're proposing tuition increases and lots of things that I was hoping we would be able to cover in the budget. And they're also proposing, I think, faculty salary increases. So we're covering in this bill increases to salaries of employees affected by the general pay plan. And yeah, I'm just not sure how that prevents a tuition increase, but I'm hoping somehow it might. I'm not sure. Okay, and then there's the judiciary who has the authority to set its own salaries, as we've seen. They gave all of their employees raises while the government of Guam pay plans were not adjusted, or well, not this general pay plan. So while we were working on this, they already gave their employees 6% raises. And so they're saying now they want more money to give to cover up from 6 to 22%. When they did that before the budget, and then in the budget asked us to cover what they had already approved. Yeah.
Yes, I recall that.
Remember that?
Yes.
Yeah. And now, yeah, they want to be included with the rest. I mean, with the rest of the government of Guam. I just think some of these, we should all be together in these things. Yeah. If we're going to be paying the bill, most especially, then maybe all of these agencies should hold their pay raises until all the rest of these general pay plan people get their raises.
I think there's a very strong argument, Speaker, for in whichever agency an employee works, if he's doing a job, he should be paid the same in whichever agency he's in. He or she is covered by the same pension plan, the same health benefits. It obviously follows that they should be paid the same salary.
So the appropriation that we're giving to the judiciary says, for the purpose of paying salary adjustment to the employees of the judiciary of Guam. Here it doesn't tie to the general pay plan at all. So technically, they can use it however they like. They could give 1% raise to one class of employees and kind of do whatever they want. That's right?
Yes.
All right. Okay. When some of the pay raises were given, for example, the teacher pay raises, they used ARP funds to cover that. Was that a legitimate use of ARP funds?
I believe that the superintendent at the time said that he secured US DOE approval for it.
That's correct. I remember that too. So is it possible that any of these could be covered with ARP funds?
It's possible. We would have to get the similar approval, I guess, in order to do that. But we've asked that local funds be provided for locally funded people, because federal funds will cover the federally funded employees.
Do the totals in this bill reflect salaries only or salaries and benefits?
Salaries only.
So what happens with the benefits?
They will come, they will attach to the salaries. And
the benefits will increase, right?
Yes.
And how will these agencies pay for those?
We believe that there's sufficient funding in these agencies for the additional benefits.
Do you know the amounts?
No.
All right, so it's possible some agencies might not be able to afford the benefits, based on the increased salaries. I mean, I just wanted to get a ballpark as to what impact that has
Yeah,
on the benefits.
The principal benefit is the additional pension plan contribution. The other benefits don't, you know, the health insurance
Doesn't
premiums don't
change, no.
change, right? So the principal change is the pension benefit, which of course benefits the pension plan because it's kind of pre-funding their deficit. But we believe that that's covered.
You believe that the agencies have enough money to cover that?
Yes.
And we don't know how many of these agencies make over 100,000 that we're giving these salary increases to, right?
No, we don't. I don't think we don't have that information. No.
All right. This April 1 date, it says implementation beginning April 1. If this bill doesn't pass, what happens on April 1? The salaries still go into effect, correct?
Well, yes, but I think we're reluctant to put them into effect without having the funding assurance.
All right. Well, do you have the authority not to put it into effect if it's been approved by the governor already?
Well, I guess I would have to go to the governor and say we didn't have the funding in order to do it, therefore it would be difficult to put it into effect.
All right. What happens to the teachers who got 18% increases, which looks like less than the 22% increases that all the other employees are going to get?
Well, generally, in all the pay plans that we've recommended updates, we did recommend movement similar to this one, either 2 to 4% or 3 to 5%. So continuity of movement in all the structures was our intent. So, you know, each plan will move with its group of employees. So in the order that it was done, you know, we did nurses first, and then we did law enforcement, and then teachers, and then the general pay plan. So when recommendations come, they come overlapped in that same order. So generally, we're looking at continuing the movement of the scale in smaller increments to make sure that we don't get into the situation we are today.
Like an annual update?
Correct.
So, for example, the nurses were first, so you might update that percentage that they received like any time now?
Based on the timing that we did all the updates, that was our intent, yes.
All right, so the teachers maybe in a year or something, if not this year, you're saying might be looking at a 2 to 4% increase?
I'd hate to put an actual date on it, but I mean, that was the intent, yes, in the beginning, yeah.
Okay, so there's hope for them. All right. It's a big question I get. Everyone wants to know if we were trying to honor teachers by giving them their pay raise at 18%, and now we're giving everybody else 22%. How are they supposed to take that? But I see. Hopefully, then they can get an update. All right, what about, I think you were asked when we were in recess about unclassified employees are covered by this general pay plan, and you said there were some. Could you just maybe state that on the record? Unclassified employees.
Yeah, so in the two categories that we're looking at, there are those that are in the unclassified service that hold limited term positions that use classified titles, so they are covered. And there are some positions that are unclassified and they were created that way, either through statute or through the process previously when the Civil Service Commission had the authority to create. So those positions will get the increase.
How many unclassified?
Truly unclassified positions, if I can remember the data I was looking at, it's a handful. It's not that many.
A handful.
Yeah, there's not a lot that we don't have a lot of truly unclassified positions to start with that we employ. So there's maybe a handful.
A handful plus the mayor's council employees.
That's correct.
Because all of those are unclassified, right?
That's correct.
Okay. And handful, all right. Those are all the questions I have for this round, Madam Chair. Thank you so much, Mr. Nauta and Mr. Byrne.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Thank you to the panel for the first round of questions. We'll now begin the second round of questions for our panel. And as a reminder to our colleagues here, this round is 5 minutes per round. So we'll begin in the same order. Senator Fisher. Your microphone.
I move to recess to a time certain, that being just 1 o'clock.
Objection, the people of Guam wants to continue working.
Let me finish the motion here.
Please state your motion.
Yes, I move to recess to a time certain, that being 2 o'clock tomorrow afternoon.
There's been a motion to recess until 2 p.m. There has been a motion to, an objection to the
2 p.m.
objection to the motion. All those in
Ma'am,
favor?
point of information, did he say 2 p.m.?
2 p.m. tomorrow.
Thank you.
Yes. So there's been a motion to recess until 2 p.m. tomorrow. There has been an objection. Please signify by raising your hand. Till tomorrow at 2 p.m. All those in favor of recessing until 2 p.m. tomorrow, please signify by raising your hand. There's a proposal to amend the motion. Okay, Senator Fisher, can you state it for the record, please?
Yes, ma'am, if I could amend the motion to recess to a time certain, that being tomorrow at 10 a.m.
Okay, there's still an objection. Senator Fisher?
Madam Chair, if you would allow me to amend my motion to recess, I would like to amend it to state that I move to recess to a time certain, that being 2 o'clock p.m. tomorrow.
There's been a motion to recess until 2 p.m. tomorrow.
Objection, we should continue working.
There has been an objection. All those in favor of recessing until 2 p.m., please raise your hand. Motion fails. I apologize, I recounted. Motion passes. We are in recess until 2 p.m. tomorrow.